Of Scotland, outbreaks of rain already pushing their way through as we go through tomorrow morning. None of it looks particularly heavy at this point, but the rain is going to become a bit more persistent, a bit heavier as we go through the day. So we could see some spray on the roads and other travel disruption is possible. As well as the rain coming through, the winds will be strengthening as we go through the day. Risk of gales around coastal parts and towards the northwest. All the time towards the southeast, staying drier and some glimmers of sunshine as well. Temperatures above average for the time of year, most places getting into double figures, so feeling pretty mild. That rain eventually pushes through overnight into Wednesday, and then Wednesday we have a bit of a cloudy, at times damp story across much of England and Wales. A bit brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but plenty of blustery showers pushing their way through. Some further wet weather to come at times as we go through Thursday and Friday, but also some sunshine. Notice, however, our temperatures are going to markedly drop. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be joining the Great British Giveaway list of winners with your chance to grab a fantastic £50,000 in tax-free cash.
My name is Cliff.
And my name is Julie, and we won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Increasingly, the courts want to cover everything with a gossamer veil of secrecy. But at last, the alleged Chinese spy who has forged close links with the Duke of York, as well as meeting Theresa May and David Cameron, has had his identity revealed. Tom Tugendhat joins me shortly. And the people have spoken. The Reverend Starmer is the worst Prime Minister in their view in modern history. A poll has revealed within 5 months of taking office, Sir Keir has the worst approval rating on record. Perhaps one of the reasons why is that he's busy betraying Brexit. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson who had a much better approval rating, has launched a scathing attack on Starmer for trying to drag us back into the EU. I'll also be looking at a certain GB News presenter who has refused to undertake parliamentary anti-bullying training. Plus, as it emerges Labour's business and farming tax grab will cost more than it makes, I'll be speaking to a farmer who spoke at today's rally in London. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my particularly perspicacious panel, the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views at mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. It's just gone 8 o'clock. These are your headlines from the GB Newsroom. First, that breaking news coming to us from the US, where 3 people, including a juvenile suspect, have died after a shooting at a school in Wisconsin. US police said the shooting occurred at Abundant Life Christian School in the state capital of Madison. Authorities said children were among the dead, while police believe the suspected shooter was a student at the school. Writing on social media, police said multiple injuries have been reported, and this remains an active and ongoing investigation. Now, the alleged Chinese spy linked to Prince Andrew has said he did nothing wrong or unlawful after he was named publicly for the first time. In a statement, Yang Tengbo added that the widespread description of me as a spy is entirely untrue. The High Court lifted a ban on naming Yang, described as a close contact of the Duke, after rejecting his bid for anonymity. The 50-year-old, who was banned from Britain on national security grounds, ran a lobbying firm with ties to Beijing, Westminster and royal circles. Yang reportedly attended the Duke's birthday party in 2020 and helped organise a UK-China business summit. Pressure to reveal his identity mounted after Reform UK's Nigel Farage vowed to name him in Parliament. Meanwhile, the Duke of York will not join the royal family for Christmas at Sandringham, according to sources. It's understood both Prince Andrew and his ex-wife, the Duchess of York, have decided to avoid the annual family gathering amid the ongoing scandal over the Duke's close links to the alleged Chinese spy. It comes after the Duke was urged to, quote, do the decent thing and maintain a low profile over the Christmas period to avoid causing further embarrassment to the King. In other news, killer nurse Lucy Letby's legal team has said they'll be asking the Court of Appeal to immediately review all of her convictions because an expert witness has now changed his mind on the cause of the death of 3 babies. Her new lawyer, Mark MacDonald, said Dr. Dewey Evans had told the jury Letby had injected air down a nasal gastric tube, leading to the death of the 3 babies. But he said Dr. Evans had now changed his mind. Letby is serving 15 whole-life terms in prison for the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 7 others while working at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016. And the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, has apologised for not acting sooner in the case of sex abuse by priest David Tudor, but insists there was no cover-up. Tudor, banned for life from ministry after admitting abuse involving 2 girls, was not removed until fresh complaints emerged. Cottrell said it was impossible to act sooner and described the case as horrible and intolerable. His statement follows an investigation and he stressed that Tudor was never protected. Those are the latest GB News headlines. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. The state has been infected by a creeping culture of secrecy and anonymity. With nearly every news story, someone appears to be benefiting from some sort of order, often escaping public scrutiny. Anonymity is meant to protect victims, but increasingly it's being used to protect perpetrators and malefactors, especially the rich and powerful. Take the horrific case of Sarah Sharif. The judge who agreed that Sarah Sharif's father could have custody of her has been given anonymity. But why? Ought he or she not be accountable for his or her actions? Isn't justice meant to be open? Or think of Southport. It took days before the courts finally named the suspect, leaving the information vacuum. Even with the case of Chris Carber, the gang member who would have faced trial for attempted murder had he not been shot by a firearms police officer, attempts were made to hide his criminal background from the public even after he was dead. Recently, we covered a long list of illegal migrant criminals who dodged deportation, but who were also granted anonymity. Take the Nigerian illegal migrant and convicted drug dealer who avoided deportation last month. He has his anonymity protected. So did the Syrian illegal migrant and convicted bank robber who won the right to stay in the UK in October. So there is some good news, and the good news is that the alleged Chinese spy who forged close links with a number of senior figures, including the Duke of York and 2 prime ministers, who was known up till this afternoon as H6, has finally had his anonymity lifted and can be named as Yang Tengbo. The Special Immigration Appeals Commission, SIAC, that granted Tengbo anonymity also routinely gives it to those whose cases come before it. One of the very few we know about is Shamima Begum, but the others we simply don't get told about. This cult of secrecy within our institutions is not only contradictory to free speech, but it endangers national security. The role and influence of China in the nation's affairs needs to be understood. It is potentially the biggest threat to the nation. But if alleged spies are not unmasked, how can people evaluate the risk? The whole culture of judicial secrecy is unwelcome in terms of the rule of law, but also potentially dangerous. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, few people know more about this issue than my next guest, Tom Tugendhat, who had this to say to GB News earlier today before Tengbo's identity was revealed.
The Labour Party is frankly being reckless in reaching out to China as they did at the G20 and as Rachel Reeves is planning to do in January without having the proper protections ready. Look, the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme would have built up the pattern of life. That means that incidents like this would have been alerted, would have been brought to attention earlier, and we would have been able to deal with them. Because as the intelligence expression goes, if you want to find a needle in a haystack, first you need a haystack. And the first scheme, particularly with the enhanced tier, would build up that haystack, which means that you can actually find out what's going on.
Tom, thank you very much for joining me. Tengbo has now been named, and the secrecy surrounding it is part of the problem, isn't it? That it makes the discussion about the risk that is posed much harder to have.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's why the first scheme is so important. That's why I was pushing for it. I mean, as you and I both know, the election came a little earlier than either of us were expecting. Otherwise, I'd have had it in place in time for November. I had the various actions, but it needs, as you know, SIs need a certain amount of time. Sorry, statutory instruments need a certain amount of time in Parliament. We ran out of time in Parliament because of the election, so I wasn't able to get it in. But it was lined up to be ready so that we had that public briefing, as it were, those public documents that would allow the intelligence services, journalists, indeed anybody who was particularly interested to find out where this pattern was coming from. Because if you're looking for a pattern, first you need the information. You can't discover a pattern off one piece of information. You need a volume.
And you also need to carry people with you.
That's
because
right.
There are endless conspiracy theories on the internet and people saying that countries are doing this, that and the next thing. If everything's secret, the British public can't put the pieces together, and therefore they won't be certain if the government says this is what's happening, that it actually is. They need to have the facts for themselves.
Well, you'll forgive me, as Security Minister, I promised to keep the King's secrets, and there are certain secrets which, well, in fact, there's all the secrets that I was asked to keep that I will keep. But there is also a culture of openness that we need to have to make sure people trust the state. Look, you and I both know that one of the things that we've seen on the internet in recent years is a profusion of conspiracy theories for a whole series of reasons. One of the things we've got to do to make sure people trust their own state, let alone understand the threats that they face, is that we're open about the things we can be open about. Now, you listed a few just now at the beginning of the show, where we need to be clear what it is that we're dealing with, so that when the police say something, when the police say they're dealing with an incident, we know they're dealing with an incident. When they say they've arrested somebody, we know they've arrested them for legitimate reasons. When we say that you should be cautious about certain interactions. I've been warning about interactions, as you know, between the Chinese state, for example, and academics. And a lot of academics have said to me, well, you're just paranoid. No, I'm not paranoid. I'm setting out a very clear pattern, but I need that pattern to be public.
And Tengbo himself denies that he is a spy and deserves, in the public press's innocence until proved guilty. But what I'm interested in finding out from you as a former security minister is the degree to which China is operating in this way, is trying to seek to influence British public opinion and to find out inside information about what's going on in the UK.
So let me start by saying there's, if you like, there's two forms of spying. There's the sort of, if you like, the James Bond image where you're trying to steal the nuclear secrets or whatever it happens to be. That's very limited. What the Chinese state, through the United Front Work Department, is really trying to do is to build up their own version of the first scheme, if you like, their pattern of life, so that they understand the gossip, they understand the pressure points, they understand the leverage that they can have on individuals, so that were they to need to want to get something out of you or me, they would know the gossip behind that may exert pressure. The fact that you're particularly fond of glacé fruits, for example, might, pressure you into a certain action. And those sort of things are exactly what this is about. This isn't about spying as in stealing secrets off a prince or indeed off anybody else, but understanding the pattern, understanding how people behave.
Because the Duke of York, frankly, won't know any secrets. He's not the king. He doesn't receive state papers, never has done. It's trying to receive acceptability in British society so that then you're meeting people informally when their guard is down and you may be able to garner a little bit of information. And if you've got lots of people doing that, then it's helpful to the Chinese state.
That's exactly right. And, the United Front Work Department is estimated, I mean, these are very crude estimates, but is estimated to be in the tens of thousands of people. And some of them will be actually paid, and many of them will be people who are influenced or who are asked to help for a specific purpose, for a specific mission, but actually otherwise they're ordinary business people or academics or whatever else they happen to be.
And this is very interesting for them. They know how British society works. But they're also buying influence as well, aren't they? That the Cambridge University colleges that are receiving money or have received money from China, it's about creating an atmosphere that is pro-China as well as finding out secrets.
Well, you're right, but it's not just about creating an atmosphere that's pro-China. It's also about silencing debate. So, for example, you can look at two aspects that are particularly obvious. Debate about Tibet, for example, where the Chinese have a perspective. The Tibetans, quite understandably, have a different perspective, that they're an independent state that has been occupied. Or you can talk about Xinjiang, where the Uyghur population is said to be suffering a genocide, and we certainly know that there are many, many hundreds, possibly millions, who are in various forms of detention. Now, the Chinese state quite obviously rejects those claims and is trying to silence debate on that. But actually, it's on more prosaic things. So things that you may think, why is the Chinese state bothered about this? So we've had reports about academics who are talking about, for example, environmental policy, who are having their research shut down, or they're talking about demographics. But these criticisms of the Chinese state are seen as threatening the Communist Party and its, as it would put it, good governance. And so they're trying to even shut down things that are actually in our interest. We need to know when environmental policies in a country as large as China are failing. We need to know when the demographic statistics in a country as large as China are different. They matter to us.
Well, it's also quite important if COVID came out of a laboratory in Wuhan, which may have been the biggest threat to the West in modern times.
Well, you'll remember when it happened, I was one of the people who said, I can't prove it, but given how many wet markets there are and how many viral labs there are, it looks very likely that this came out of the Wuhan virus lab. Now, at the time, I was accused of conspiracy peddling, and I was accused of any number of things.
And the WHO, which receives a lot of money from China, immediately said this was nonsense.
Exactly right. And of course, what does it turn out to be? I mean, Lord Ridley has pointed this out, and many other researchers have pointed out. That is the most likely source. But of course, we can't prove it. Why can't we prove it? Because the Chinese state has shut down all the inquiries.
Okay, but is there a realpolitik line that China is big, China is powerful, China is rich, we need to get on with China, and probably the CIA spies on us a bit too, and the American ambassador invites people to jolly parties in his nice palace in, just off Regent's Park, and that this is all what other countries do, and we should just accept it and recognise the economic advantages of a golden age of relationships with China.
So I'm going to stop you on one thing. You know, our relationship with the United States, with the Five Eyes community, is exceptionally close, and we share an awful lot.
Yeah, we're close allies, but I bet they still spy on us.
Well,
they've spied on Germany for years. We know that. You know.
Yeah, but they're not in the Five Eyes.
No, I know.
Look, we have a very close relationship with some countries, closer with some than others. That's certainly true. And you know, you could say that's just the nature of things. But the nature of things is also that we should be able to defend ourselves. You know, just because people behave badly towards us doesn't mean we should say, well, that's what people do. No, we should be able to defend ourselves.
How real is the threat? What do you think is the worst China can do?
Well, don't ask me what the worst they can do. Look at what they're doing right now. Look at the way that we've seen certain technologies suddenly disappear from factories in the United Kingdom, losing jobs, losing economic benefit to literally thousands of people in the UK, whether it's on composite materials or whether it's on biochemistry or so on. We're seeing a level of industrial espionage that is not just, this isn't just some minor annoyance for a small company. This is an actual threat to the economic prosperity of our country. Because, let's be frank, Jacob, the UK's economy today is not based on some mineral in the ground that we extract and that can't be stolen. It's based on the ideas and the imagination of the British people. Now, those ideas and imaginations, come to fruition in the products that our businesses make, in the software that they write, in the biochemistry that they develop, in the medicines they invent. If those are stolen, you're not just stealing the product of today, you're actually stealing the ability to profit into the future, and that really threatens our economy and our freedom.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening. Of the messages from our sponsors, Sir Keir Starmer, the Reverend, has broken a record, but it's not one to be proud of. Plus, Boris Johnson has launched an excoriating attack on Sir Keir for betraying Brexit.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Following the summer riots and the resurgence of far-right ideologies, the former Education Secretary told peers that reinforcing shared values is now more crucial than ever.
So we're asking this morning, should we teach British values or would it be a step backward?
Well, how do you even start? To debate this now, we're joined by the Campaign for Real Education chairman, Chris McGovern, and political commentator Matthew Stadlen.
Well, I think these days, particularly in schools, it's quite fashionable to look at the negative sides of Britain's identity, particularly British history. Personally, I think I'm very proud of being British, and I think we need to be proud of our country like most other countries around the world are.
As Chris says, Matthew, lots of other countries do it. Heck, you only have to look at the United States, don't you, to see how sort of patriotic they are. Is there anything wrong in trying to instil a bit of that amongst our youth?
I'm just worried it sounds a little bit communist, Stephen, being told what it is to be British. I've got my own personal but very vague views of what British values might be: inclusivity, patience, being able to queue, decency, respect for democracy and the rule of law. But I mean, very many people will have different sets of values. Some people are racist. So are British values racist? You talked about the far right. I think we all know what the far right is. It's sort of violent, xenophobic racism. But if you have, say, 3-4 million people in this country who might describe themselves as racist or far right, and they're British, or as British as you lot and as I am, does that mean those values get taught in schools? My worry is it's a little bit communist.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking about China and anonymity with Tom Tugendhat, and the mailmogs have come in. Ken says the real concern must be the ease with which money can influence our politicians and royals. At least the Cambridge spies were motivated by ideology, not cash. And Peter says, Jacob, why did it take 12 years to identify this spy? And who was watching out for Prince Andrew to warn him of the dangers of this man? Well, perhaps we should ask the Foreign Office what they were up to. When even the left-wing activist Alistair Campbell can admit that the Reverend Starmer hasn't had the greatest of starts to his premiership on his podcast, the Daily Mail's new poll is no surprise. Sir Keir Starmer is the worst British Prime Minister since records began, according to a survey conducted by Ipsos. After just 5 months in office, the PM has a negative 34 approval rating, the lowest within that period, as I said, since records began. Well, I'm joined now by my most perspicacious panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, let you defend your friend and former colleague, Sir Keir Starmer.
When did records begin?
Well, opinion polling has been going back quite a long time. I think you're going back...
General opinion polling,
You'll
yes,
be going back at least to Ted Heath.
Yes, I think
it's quite something to be more unpopular than Ted Heath.
Well, I think that what often happens in these things is you find a way of presenting it is the worst. During Liz Truss, they presented that she was the worst ever that's been around. And you present a particular way that you present it, makes it sound awful, etc. Look,
but Liz Truss became unpopular and the Tories got rid of her, and pretty ruthless.
Yeah.
And got Rishi Sunak in for better or worse. One reads in the Sunday papers that Labour MPs are getting a bit tetchy with Sir Keir and beginning to feel that he's not cutting the mustard. And this can't help, can it?
No, I think it's all a little bit of hot air, really. What matters is not what the polls say about your popularity. And actually, that's what's important, is MPs more generally and ministers, they're not delegates to go for the whim of what the electorate feels at the time. They're elected for the period of the course, and people will make their decision at the next election. And we are so many years off that. Opinion polling at the moment is almost completely useless.
Dare I say, I have myself used all these arguments to defend a government when it's in desperate trouble, and we know it's not like that. But the truth is that when a government gets really unpopular, the backbench MPs get itchy feet. Wes Streeting's clearly on manoeuvres. He won't be alone. People will be having nice dinners, probably not at Hertford Street, but wherever Labour people go, and things will be beginning to move.
Look, if someone shows that they're not able to be Prime Minister anymore or be Minister anymore, the system corrects itself and it replaces. And that happens in all parties. I think we are so far from that at the moment. And I also think some of the difficulties that Keir has inherited are not personal Keir difficulties. They are a country that's in a really bad state, an economic situation around the world that is stagnating, an electorate around the world, actually, not just in Britain, that is kind of fed up with whatever the status quo is. They don't really know what they want, but they know they don't want whatever's here. And it doesn't matter whatever is here, they still don't want it. And I think that the likelihood is that these things will show to be a bit of a flash in the pan.
OK, Tim, let me bring you on this. There's a wonderful line from Churchill about how you back your leader, you support your leader, you prop your leader up, and then you give him the chop when he turns out to be completely useless. Is Starmer getting into this territory?
I think Lloyd is right, that you've got to remember it's a parliamentary term. And over the course of that, your popularity can go up and down. Look at Margaret Thatcher. There was one point at which the Tories in the early 80s were behind not just the SDP, but also Michael Foot's Labour Party. What mattered was that after 4 years, after the Falklands and after the economy improved, her popularity was such that she could then
But she had a sense of direction. The thing here is there's no sense of direction.
This is the important thing. I think the issue with this polling is not whether or not, in general, a leader is popular. It's, is a leader popular at this point in their leadership? And what is a little unusual is for someone to be elected with a historic number of seats, but so quickly for their personal popularity to plummet. Now, we can blame some of that on economic circumstance. When people are unhappy, they're unhappy with their politicians. But I'm afraid politics is ultimately a personality contest. It just is. And he's unpopular. He's not good at this. Keir Starmer won by default. There were so few Labour MPs. He replaced Jeremy Corbyn. He was the only vaguely moderate soft-left candidate. And then he won the general election campaign by default because everyone hated the Tories at that point. But they didn't like him. And there were hints in that campaign of what he would govern like. And I suppose some of us couldn't quite believe he'd be that bad. Remember how sensitive he was about the toolmaker thing. He kept going around saying, my father's a toolmaker. And people started laughing. And he couldn't cope with people laughing. And now he gets into office. What is it? It's the £22 billion black hole. And what a surprise. Everyone's laughing at it. And he can't cope with the fact that this man lacks political dexterity. He lacks charm. He lacks talent in the political arena. And therefore, he's unable to make the best of a tricky situation in a way that previous leaders like Tony Blair or indeed Maggie probably could.
Absolutely. Well, let's go on, because perhaps one of the reasons Sir Keir's approval rating is so poor is because, as we pointed out on GB News last week, he's been busy betraying Brexit, among other things with the obscure metrology bill in the House of Lords and the endless foreign junkets he makes to suck up to the Europeans. Well, Boris Johnson, the great man, launched an excoriating attack on the Prime Minister over the weekend as he prepared a team of 100 civil servants in what Boris called an EU surrender squad. Tim, well, let's continue with you, because this is inevitably going to make him unpopular, because a lot of historic Labour voters voted to leave. The Democratic decision's been made, and they're trying to get us back in through grandmother's footsteps.
If those voters do perceive it as a betrayal of Brexit, because, of course, there's a counter-argument of saying because the Tories didn't implement Brexit properly, what exactly is it that Starmer is looking to undo? Because right now we have the barriers that have come about because we left the EU without the compensating free trade with the rest of the world. I think
we joined the CTPPP yesterday.
We did with Japan. I know, but that remains terribly esoteric.
No, but the things are happening, and the European Court can't make judgments on British laws anymore.
Right, but I know it's different, but then the fact that Rob Jenrick is going around saying we need to leave the ECHR leaves people confused. But the key thing with the EU has always been immigration. It's whether or not he betrays us on free movement that I think will make a big difference. But I doubt the voters right now are really that wedded to Brexit.
I think the voters know now that the big thing of Brexit wasn't immigration, because they saw us leave the EU and the Conservative Party to throw open the doors and say, oh, actually, it was... Oh, we've said to you all along it was the EU that was forcing us to have this policy to allow people in. In fact, we've done it ourselves. And now I think people say, well, to some extent, if we allowed a few Polish people, most of whom are now returning back to their home country if they've not got family here, because you get a better life there because of how badly the economy has been run for the last 14 years. So people actually start looking around and say, well, actually, it wasn't so bad in the past having some limited open borders with European countries compared to the open borders with the whole world, which is what the Conservatives implemented.
But it was nearly 6 million people who came from the EU, which we didn't count at the time. We just made a guess, and the guess was about 2 million, and it turned out to be over 5 million, heading towards 6.
Over the course of our whole membership?
Basically in the last 10 years. It was very concentrated.
But as Tony Blair has said, that was culturally less controversial form of immigration than, say, subcontinental.
Well, that's basically code for a racist immigration policy. That's like the White Australia policy.
I know, but he's crudely put. He's kind of right. The thing which is politically sensitive at the moment is not Polish migration. It's migration from Commonwealth countries.
But Jacob, the migration, the reason you need migration rules is because if a country is economically different from you, you have a perverse situation where people flood in too large numbers. Most countries that are economically similar to us are white countries, let's be honest, and so therefore that means we will have a preference to people that come from majority white countries. That's not because they're white, that's because those countries are economically similar to us, and so it's almost a wokish kind of thing to say that's racist to say that. That's the fact, isn't it?
The people who came from Poland were coming when Poland was much poorer. So it wasn't to do with race, it's to do with the economy.
It wasn't that much poorer. And
it was. We go back to 2004 when it started. It was much poorer.
Well, it wasn't as poor as some of the very poorest countries that we've now opened up to effectively. And that is a perfect example of how if you just let one or two poorer countries to have a easier access to a bloc, not all at once, but eventually, what you do is you allow them to improve themselves. They then become really good trading partners, and you can move on to the next country. That's the whole point of the system, rather than saying, let's just invite anyone from everywhere in the world and let's hope for the best. It doesn't help those countries, and it doesn't help this country.
I think you can avoid both, I have to say.
Well,
I think the interesting thing with Starmer is it feels as though he's employed 100 civil servants to do that. Gosh, this man just loves adding to the public sector roles. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to roll back so many regulations that you get to the point where you've negotiated everything back to the point where it's just one step away from being in the single market or the customs union, why not just join the single market or the customs union? I worry that he is building the logic for return because he's restructuring the economy to such a point whereby we may as well be in it because we're acting as though we are.
The Conservatives in Reform should be absolutely clear that if they are elected at any point, they will pull out straight away.
But they then have to show what the economic benefit will be of doing that, what they will then do different that will compensate for the problems of trade.
There's nothing to compensate.
There's a huge
Your
benefit.
next-door neighbour trade versus trade from around the world.
This isn't true. Gravity models have been completely discredited on trade. They thought we would have a 300% increase in trade by joining the euro. The same economists who then think that all our trade is dependent on Europe. Trade is 6% of our total economy. It's not the most fundamental point. The question is how we regulate here. And one of the reasons we're not building houses is a judgment of the European Union on the Nutrients Directive. We are having our economy held back still.
And as a Japanophile, I am as excited. I'm more excited about free trade with Japan than I would have been with Europe, and I don't understand why. The relationship with Europe is regarded as this essential one to our identity, whereas the relationship with Japan, which I think is a country we have so much in common with, which is so exciting.
Because it's about socialist internationalism. It's all about us being ruled as part of a big internationalist bloc.
Right.
It's not about economics for the people who support it.
But true internationalism would be to be excited about Japan.
With the agreement with Japan, we are then bound by, and our businesses are bound by, secret courts, ISDS courts, which then will rule Britain. You won't even have a British judge necessarily on some of them, and that will be able to give huge compensation amounts to foreign businesses if we change our mind about what we want to do. At least with the European courts, we knew what the judgments were.
None of these courts can change UK law.
Well, what they can do...
They simply can't, whereas the European Court can change UK law. It can override UK law. It's fundamentally different. Any other agreement is controlled democratically.
And it's an economic transaction rather than a political thing you're signing up to where you don't know where it's going to end.
Destroying your economy, putting fines on businesses, putting fines on governments, huge fines on governments with ISDS, these secret courts. That does not help any form of democracy. That is a kind of backward step. And at least in European courts, yes, there is the ability for them to rule that your laws are not compliant, but there is margin of appreciation, and the government can decide not to implement if it wishes to.
No, it can't. Whilst we were in the European Community, we couldn't. Under the 1972 European Community Act, Section 2.2, we had to implement their rules. Anyway, thank you very much to my panel, not being particularly perspicacious on that point. In a moment, we'll be looking at which members of Parliament have refused to complete anti-bullying training. One clue is that one of them works for GB News. Can you guess?
Good evening. Here's your latest Met Office weather update for GB News. Whilst it is going to stay mild for many of us as we go into tomorrow, there will be some wet and windy weather to come. That's because there is currently a system waiting out in the Atlantic, but ahead of this, we do currently have a front that's been lingering across some parts of northern Scotland and has already brought a fair amount of rain. That rain is going to ease as we go through tonight and into tomorrow morning. Otherwise, across other parts of the country, largely dry. Quite a bit of cloud coming in from the west, but some clear skies towards eastern parts in particular. And that cloud will do two things. Could bring some hill fog to parts of the south, and also it means our temperatures aren't going to drop. So it is going to be a mild and blustery start to the day for some of us tomorrow. As we go through tomorrow morning, then yes, quite a dry start across many parts of central southern England and Wales. A few spots of rain where the clouds thick enough, and like I said, could be a bit murky. Some hill fog to watch out for too. Further north, across Northern Ireland and many parts of Scotland, outbreaks of rain already pushing their way through as we go through tomorrow morning. None of it looks particularly heavy at this point, but the rain is going to become a bit more persistent, a bit heavier as we go through the day. So we could see some spray on the roads and other travel disruption is possible. As well as the rain coming through, the winds will be strengthening as we go through the day. Risk of gales around coastal parts and towards the northwest. All the time towards the southeast, staying drier and some glimmers of sunshine as well. Temperatures above average for the time of year, most places getting into double figures, so feeling pretty mild. That rain eventually pushes through overnight into Wednesday, and then Wednesday we have a bit of a cloudy, at times damp story across much of England and Wales. A bit brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but plenty of blustery showers pushing their way through. Some further wet weather to come at times as we go through Thursday and Friday, but also some sunshine. Notice, however, our temperatures are going to markedly drop. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the Reverend Starmer and the great Boris and Brexit, and the mailmogs have come in. Wally says, I have no problem with Keir Starmer going abroad, but I do have a problem with the fact he keeps coming back. We should have talked about his travel plans. I keep on hearing he's going to go abroad less, and then he's away again. Tony, the Reverend Starmer is the worst Prime Minister since Spencer Perceval, Jacob. I think, Tony, you're harsh on Spencer Perceval. The only thing he did wrong was to get assassinated. What about Goodrich? He wasn't very good. Or Wilmington, if we to go a bit earlier. He didn't last very long. Neither of them did, actually. Of the 650 members of Parliament, it appears only 5 have refused to complete the anti-bullying training, one of whom is my distinguished GB News column, Nigel Farage. A spokesman for Nigel's team said Mr Farage has not taken part in behaviour code awareness training and has no intention of engaging with this woke scheme. Regrettably, I had to introduce the scheme, and I'm afraid I thought it was a frightful waste of time, but such is the mood of our age. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, you and I both did this training last time round. It's obviously right that MPs are free to choose whether to do any particular course or not.
Yes, I mean, I did the pilot with me and Harriet Harman. You introduced, we did the first round of it, and I thought, okay, get it over and done with quickly. Look, I didn't necessarily agree with all the conclusions that the training came out with, you know, kind of... And what you should do, you know, they showed an example of what if you see someone slapping someone's bum in the workplace. Well, my view is that you should say something, and actually the training was you should report it, you know, kind of, and I think that you should say things when you see them immediately, because you need to work out whether there's been a misunderstanding or whether actually they're, you know, as Harriet, I think, put it at the time, well, maybe they could be husband and wife and it would be perfectly acceptable, you know. So I do think that the training can be disagreed with, but it creates interesting conversations, and the point of the training is not to tell you what to think, but to have those interesting conversations in the group of MPs and then to leave with a surer mind of what you will do if you see or hear things that you think shouldn't be happening. And that, I don't think, is harmful. If it was instructing to say, you need to think this and you can't pass the course unless you have agreed with X, Y, Z, then I would agree with you that it would be totally wrong, but that's not what the course was.
Well, it was slightly like that. It was telling people not to throw the stapler at their parliamentary assistant. Are you a great stapler thrower?
I hope nobody does that.
No, I'm banned near sharp objects completely. I had to do this. I also, thanks to Theresa May, had to do training on the Modern Slavery Act. And I know that there is some great social cause behind that, but I think it's preposterous that I have to take a test to make sure that I'm not trading in slaves. Are
you sure you're not?
No, I don't think I am. Although having ranted and raved about it, I suppose historically I'm exactly the kind of person who probably would. But demographically. No, I don't... I can both see the point of this and I can also see why people personally object to it. And the personal objection is the idea that I might be a candidate for this, I might be considered this, I might be someone who... I find that offensive.
Well, I also think it's a frightful waste of money because not only are new MPs having to do it, but all the MPs who've already done it.
Yes.
If in 5 years you've forgotten how to behave yourself, doing another course isn't going to make you remember.
Yes, no, that's true. I mean, of course, the course is largely... It's not about telling you not to do things, of course. It's about telling you what to do if you, as Lloyd says, if you see something happening.
Well, it is telling you not to do things. It was telling you, which seems pretty obvious, not to invite your parliamentary assistants to come into your bedroom when you were staying in an hotel.
Right, OK.
Well, and the thing is, some MPs had done that.
Yes. Some MPs still do that.
Well, and some MPs were chucked out because of it. So reminders of people. And the thing is, MPs is a very unusual workplace and it gets people from very different political trends, from very different backgrounds, different jobs in the past. So saying to people, look, we're all here in this kind of agora, this space that is open for you to have debate, but we need to set some kind of understanding of where the ground rules are. You can choose to break them, but at least you know this is the norm that has been set here. I don't see what's wrong with that. We do that in all other workplaces and all other locations.
Well, that's because there's a trend, isn't there, towards actually creating some sort of barrier to people getting into Parliament in the first place. That's what we're worried about, is that standards are being set. And there was certainly some discussion of this with the last Parliament, of can we come up with rules which make it impossible for people who, for instance, are racist to become MPs? Well, I wouldn't vote for a racist to become an MP, but if the public wishes to have a racist as an MP, they should be free to. Ultimately, MPs should be able to make mistakes and then be sacked by the electorate, not Parliament first selecting the kind of person who can become an MP. And that's where I see some principal objection to this, which is this is about trying to define the character of people who can serve in Parliament. No, in principle, we should be able to elect crooks.
And to some extent, look, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that it's a useful course for people to voluntarily choose to do, and the vast majority of people have done it and have benefited from it, probably. But I also think there's a role for political parties here. The political parties put their stamp of endorsement on a candidate to the electorate, and that is meant to not only represent political persuasion, it's also meant to say to the electorate, we have made sure that that candidate meets the kind of values that we have. And if there's a party that doesn't want those kinds of values and wants to go to the electorate and say, well, our values are of horribleness, then it's the electorate's choice whether to vote for it, not the Parliament's choice whether to kick someone out.
You see, I just wonder whether it does any good, because we did at the beginning of the last Parliament, almost everybody did it, and we still had lots of occasions when Tory MPs behaved very badly, and that was part of the reason Boris Johnson fell. We had one or two Labour MPs who behaved badly, including one we're never allowed to know what he did, part of the cover-up of politics. This is not going to change bad people into good people. And people who aren't going to behave like this, it's just a waste of taxpayers' money.
That's the left-wing thing, though, isn't it? The idea that you can, by diktat, change human behaviour. You can try. It's reasonable to want to try and to improve human beings, but ultimately we're governed by human nature. And that you get predators in human nature who will actually excel in an environment in which there are official rules, because they will work out how to sign up to them or even play up to them by saying things like, I'm a feminist. Come and have dinner with me.
I think it works two ways as well. I also think that you need training to say to people, this is acceptable and you need to stomach it, and this is not acceptable.
Well, if you come across the phantom stapler thrower of the Palace of Westminster, ring 7219 3000 for the House of Commons switchboard. Thank you to my panel after the break as farmers continue their protest against Labour's brutal tax regime. I'll be joined by one of them to discuss new data that undermine Labour's entire war on the farmers.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Recruiters are warning that if you're not tech-savvy, you could be missing out with your CV failing to make it through an AI-powered sifting process. So we've gone from sort of computer says no HR people ticking boxes to AI, right? Is that right?
Yes, well, this applies once you're in the job as well, as a recent report revealed that employees expect AI will manage an average of a third of their tasks within the next 12 months. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Cosmo Curry, founder of Van Kaizen, a leading company in technology
recruitment.
Morning, Cosmo.
Morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Ben.
Well,
Hi,
yeah, thank you
Tatiana.
for joining us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Because AI is, of course, on the rise, and now in the workplace and in universities and things. Another article came to mind. There was a student recently, I think it was in the news just the other day, that got in trouble for using AI. So there's, you know, for exam purposes and essays. So there's lots of different ways that it can be a good thing and a bad thing. But you're, of course, here to talk about the ways in which AI is a good thing within the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is here to stay, for sure. And we're seeing this rise of people using it in such a clever format. And with the other side of it is also we're seeing people who are using it and during the process of that, they are losing their character. We're losing the actual insight into the individual behind that. And so we've kind of got this kind of mix. And I think AI is phenomenal when you're looking at it from a point of view of optimization, point of view of speed, getting results. But I think we have to remember that, you know, the fundamental of recruitment is people. And we cannot substitute the people, the personal aspect, by replacing that with AI.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Labour's brutal budget has received plenty of brickbats, but none has been more acute than that of the farmers who now face death duties on farms bequeathed that exceed the value of £1 million. The move is part of a broader tax change that includes businesses in taxable estates. But new analysis from CBI Economics has found that the move will actually lead to a loss of 125,000 jobs and hence cost the Treasury £2.6 billion over 5 years. But the policy was only ever projected to generate £1.3 billion for the Treasury anyway. So this appears to be the latest case of socialists learning the rule of unintended consequences and losing money. Well, I'm joined now by Ollie Harrison, one of today's speakers at today's Farmers' Rally at the London Palladium. Ollie, thank you very much for coming in. So tell me, what was going on at the Palladium?
So farmers, we've had the noise for probably 5 or 6 weeks now since the budget on the APR, Agricultural Property Relief, and the BPR, which is Business Property Relief. But of course, it affects most businesses in the UK, and most of them are family businesses. So we wanted to say, well, you know, come and join us. We've got the noise, we've got the media, and explain that it's not just us. Because one of the things people keep saying is, why shouldn't farmers pay inheritance tax? Well, personally, I don't think any business should, especially when it's employing people and paying taxes when it generates profits.
Well, every business that has any capital equipment is likely to be hit by this tax, that any manufacturing business is likely to have assets of over £1 million, they will be hit. You're actually encouraging people to have businesses without any assets.
Exactly, yeah, and this £1 million, in most businesses, it's just on paper. It doesn't really exist. You know, it's something that's grown in the background. You know, machinery now.
Just remind me of how much a new tractor would cost.
Well, we got to this summer and they were 250,000 each.
Each. Yeah. So you're talking about 4 tractors making up £1 million.
A big tractor is £1 million.
OK, just one?
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I didn't realise. I knew tractors were quite expensive, but I didn't realise that there were tractors at £1 million before this conversation started. And therefore, any farmer who is doing it professionally, because one of the strengths of British agriculture is how it has adapted in recent years and become more concentrated. Fewer farmers, but with bigger acreage and bigger capital expenditure. they will all be hit. It's pushing it back into an older form of farming.
Yeah, and don't forget that these tractors, list price will be £1 million. You might get a discount, 700,000. Well, we don't write a cheque out for 700,000. Originally that tractor would have been £500 in the 1960s, and then it's traded in and traded up and traded up and traded up, and now we're at these levels with £250,000. And that is the thing, that in this budget, they're trying to tax 20% of a multi-generational business in one generation, which we can't afford to pay.
And when you go to the Palladium, what's the mood amongst farmers and businesses? Are they saying they're going to give up? Do they think they can get through this, that it'll be a bit of a squeeze?
We literally don't know where to go. And that is why people wanted to come. They need direction. They want to feel like they're doing something, because the industry has just been completely beaten. We've had some terrible the worst harvest ever. And then now there's just no motivation within farming and other business now to invest and go on.
And farmers have this large capital asset, which they use for very little income to feed the country. You must be tempted to sell up and go to Monte Carlo.
Exactly. And this is the thing.
Because you'd have quite a lot of cash if you did.
If you did, yeah.
And do you think there's a way of handling this to say, look, you can pass land down for free and you can pass down equipment for free, but if 7 years after you've inherited, you sell up, then the tax should apply then, to do it at a later date, so that you keep the commitment to farming, but that you don't make business assets and farming assets completely exempt from...
Yeah, no, that's entirely true. I can see what they've tried to do. They've just got the bar wrong. They've just been out of touch. They've obviously rushed the budget through. Look, this is us. This is what we're going to do. And I feel like they've been a little bit stubborn now and not wanting to admit their mistake.
And do you think there are rich landowners who it would be possible to catch without catching family farms, which seems to be what they were initially aiming at?
There's a mechanism to catch the people that were doing it to dodge tax, shall we say. But don't forget, they've still risked buying that land, and they're still farming, and they're still producing food.
And the rate of return they get is pretty low compared to other investments.
0.3% in a good year. They could put the money in the bank, or like you say, they could put it into Monte Carlo in an apartment and watch the Formula One.
So the landowners are actually helping the farming community, because the rent they get is less than they could get on other investments, certainly less than they get to put cash in the bank.
Exactly. So I've rented land off, shall we say, rich landowners in the past, but because they've not really needed the return on investment, I've rented it very cheaply, and I've been able to grow my business because of that. I don't really begrudge people buying land that have got money spare. It's better than putting that than putting it abroad.
And it then ensures that the farming community can continue. And British farming has been getting more and more efficient in recent years. It's actually been a success story.
It has, but the ability to feed ourselves goes down every year, especially as there's a lot more trees being planted, environmental things happening. Now, whether that's good or bad, the self-sufficiency of the UK is the least it's ever been since the Second World War.
Absolutely. And the environmental targets seem to encourage people to take land out of production, but unfortunately, and with the solar panels, not the lowest quality land, but sometimes the best agricultural land is being lost.
Yeah, the whole thing's done by the grid connection rather than the quality of the land, which is a shame. But the other thing is, as well, is for every pound that we don't produce of food in the UK, we have to import that. So that's more money leaving the economy.
And therefore less invested here, lower wages in this country, and it's all part of the country getting poorer.
Yeah, and agricultural industry and family business and a lot of business, the economy is stalled 6 or 8 weeks ago, and that is something that we need to restart. And we can sit down, we can talk to Rachel, and we can come up with something that works for everyone. But at the moment, it's not going to work for anyone. It's certainly not them.
Well, Ollie, thank you very much for joining me. Up next, it's the one and only Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your programme this evening?
Well, are we living in a Keir Starmer dictatorship, Jacob? The suspension of local elections, in some cases apparently until 2027, seems a little bit rum, if you ask me. Will Shamima Begum be coming back? Labour aren't ruling that out. Will that be the final nail in Keir Starmer's political coffin? There's a jihadi suing a pub over its name, which is, peak Britain in 2024. And Farage, two-tier policing. The OnlyFans model who milkshaked him avoids prison, but if she'd have egged Jeremy Corbyn, she'd have gone down, wouldn't she?
Well, I don't know, but it sounds fascinating programme, lots to chew over. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset, it really is particularly good this week. It's getting ready for Christmas, but with special Christmas sun, exclusive to Somerset.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest Met Office weather update for GB News. Whilst it is going to stay mild for many of us as we go into tomorrow, there will be some wet and windy weather to come. That's because there is currently a system waiting out in the Atlantic, but ahead of this, we do currently have a front that's been lingering across some parts of northern Scotland and has already brought a fair amount of rain. That rain is going to ease as we go through tonight and into tomorrow morning. Otherwise, across other parts of the country, largely dry. Quite a bit of cloud coming in from the west, but some clear skies towards eastern parts in particular. And that cloud will do two things. Could bring some hill fog to parts of the south, and also it means our temperatures aren't going to drop. So it is going to be a mild and blustery start to the day for some of us tomorrow. As we go through tomorrow morning, then yes, quite a dry start across many parts of central southern England and Wales. A few spots of rain where the clouds thick enough, and like I said, could be a bit murky. Some hill fog to watch out for too. Further north, across Northern Ireland and many parts of Scotland, outbreaks of rain already pushing their way through as we go through tomorrow morning. None of it looks particularly heavy at this point, but the rain is going to become a bit more persistent, a bit heavier as we go through the day. So we could see some spray on the roads and other travel disruption is possible. As well as the rain coming through, the winds will be strengthening as we go through the day. Risk of gales around coastal parts and towards the northwest. All the time towards the southeast, staying drier and some glimmers of sunshine as well. Temperatures above average for the time of year, most places getting into double figures, so feeling pretty mild. That rain eventually pushes through overnight into Wednesday, and then Wednesday we have a bit of a cloudy, at times damp story across much of England and Wales. A bit brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but plenty of blustery showers pushing their way through. Some further wet weather to come at times as we go through Thursday and Friday, but also some sunshine. Notice, however, our temperatures are going to markedly drop. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000